And joining us now is Barry Levine, former executive editor of the National Enquirer. He's also the author of The Spider, Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Barry, great to have you here.
Thank you, Anna.
So you have covered this case for decades, or at least over a decade now. I know you believe all the files should be released, minus
absolutely
the stuff that would be victims' identities. So that should be redacted,
and the identity of third parties, too.
Okay, so the identity of third parties as well. So what answers, if all these files were released, what answers would you be looking for? Can you just help briefly touch on what we know and what we still don't know?
Right. Well, despite what the government said about the fact that his death was a suicide, and my book actually concluded that also, based on my investigation, that he did die behind bars without the help of anyone else or a perpetrator coming in to his cell. I do think it's important for us just to get that out of the way to see the autopsy report. We've never seen the autopsy report. Did he have defensive wounds on his hands? Could he have been fighting off an assailant? And also the investigation into his death. That, to me, is very important in terms of was there any DNA evidence on the bed sheets that he used to create a noose to hang himself? Was there foreign DNA? We would learn a great deal about the circumstances of his death.
And maybe that puts the conspiracy theories to bed.
Yes. So why not release the autopsy report and the death investigation? That's number one. Then in terms of the actual case itself, I know, having interviewed victims and attorneys and reviewing countless documents in this case for years, that we all want answers to the actual case files. And that is, of course, with the exclusion of the victims' names and information about them and also possible third parties. They have a right to know. We have a right to know, you know, as the people of this country, all the transparency that they promised us. And now they have completely held that back. What we could learn from the files, and I know your last guest was saying it could certainly open a hornet's nest of new additional conspiracy theories. But I disagree in the sense that we should see the actual hard evidence, the black and white evidence. President Trump has called it a hoax. This is material in files that is real and legitimate.
And my understanding is it could be thousands and thousands of pages.
Yes,
and
but let's see what
audio files and other types of evidence.
Sure, there were 40 computers that they confiscated over the course of his homes in New York, Florida, New Mexico, his apartment in Paris, France, the island, of course, down in the Virgin Islands. What material was on those computers? What about the 70 CDs? And what about the countless surveillance tapes? I know for a fact that he had surveillance tapes in all of his homes. In fact, back in Palm Beach, he had actually contacted the Palm Beach police and said, I have the fear that some of my employees may be stealing from me. Can you help me install surveillance cameras in my home? The Palm Beach police actually installed those cameras. So, and then, of course, they began their investigation of him back in 2005. There's material on those cameras. We should see material from all of those cameras.
I know Thomas Massie, the Republican congressman who's teamed up with Democrat Ro Khanna, really pushing for the release of these files, has talked about the need to get hands-on financial records. He says, follow the money. That's something that you have argued is also really important. Explain why.
Sure. In my op-ed piece I did for the New York Times this past weekend, I said it's super important for us to understand, were any financial crimes involved here? We know that after the slap on the wrist conviction back in 2008, he moved his sex trafficking operation to the Virgin Islands, and he was using international fixers to bring young women and children into the Virgin Islands as young as 12 years old. There were people on the other end of those countries, in Russia and Turkey, the Eastern European countries, where he was bringing in victims to satisfy his needs and those of the people that he was putting these victims out to. Who were the men involved in that? Who were the men on the other side in those countries who were putting the young women on the planes? Okay, we need to look at those wire transfers, over 4,000 wire transfers, resulting in $1 billion. That is a significant amount of money that was put through Russian banks. We need to investigate all of that and find out, are there individuals who took part in this operation, the financial side of things, who potentially could be prosecuted.
So we know the president has asked for the release of grand jury transcripts.
Yes.
That's still with judges right now making a decision on what could come from that. I want you to listen to what Trump ally, Senator Markwayne Mullin, said this weekend about the case.
Okay.
You know, every piece of file that they have, every video, every document, every flight log has all been heard by a grand jury. They've all been seen by a grand jury. And we want the judges to release it. Pam Bondi has called on the judges to release it. Trump has called on them to release it. And the Congress has called on them to release it. But we can't, because there is a true co-equal branches of government. So we can't force the judicial branch to do anything. All we can do is ask them to do it.
So that may be the case, right, for this grand jury testimony. But are there other pieces of evidence you think are in the files that would not be part of that grand jury testimony that could potentially be released by the DOJ?
I mean, to me, the grand jury files, to some degree, is a red herring. We need to see complete transparency of the actual files. The grand jury testimony is really limited to the prosecutors getting that indictment in 2019. It's extremely limited because they weren't going to give a lot away to his defense attorneys at the time. But we can still pick up bits and pieces of information. The Palm Beach Post newspaper some years back was granted some material from the 2008 grand jury at the time when the feds wanted to charge him with 50 counts. And we learned from that grand jury testimony that the prosecutors at the time called two of his young victims prostitutes. Okay, so.
And ultimately, he just agreed to plead guilty to a couple of prostitution-related crimes.
Exactly. But you can learn some details from grand jury testimony. And taken in its entirety with the opening of the files, we would get a complete picture of Jeffrey Epstein, at which we don't have at this point.
Well, we are all seeking more information right now. Barry Levine, thank you very much for joining us and offering your expertise and insight.